Hey guys, I'm going to get into the band Talk Talk, who had its course from the year 1982 to 1991. So in this 9 year span, pretty life changing band. I would say of all bands, they opened me up the most to the essence of my relationship with nature and kind of unfolding it. Now I'm starting to perceive that reading books is beneficial in a lot of ways to this. So I'm definitely going to mix that in a lot with my film watching now. Add books into the equation. It's starting now. It has to happen. And I think that Talk Talk is a band that makes me realize a lot of this. Finding words to your Talk Talk led me to the connection with nature. And now it's like I'm finding in a lot of ways, Talk Talk was kind of my gateway to all kinds of artists like Aphex Twin, New York, who are almost like electronica influence, but in a way, because this is like the most intense kind of transition of all time. Like along with the Beatles, it's kind of on the same row as the Beatles and Pink Floyd for that matter. Bands who just evolved into something wildly different from start to finish. At first, they were literally just a party band, like a synth pop band, the least serious genre, but to being the most serious genre, an inventing of genre, literally. Figures universally agree they invented the genre of post rock, which is, yeah, that's one of my top three favorite genres of all time. It's definitely coming back to me as such an important and let's say enjoyable, entertaining genre. Like it's always captivating to me. Like, it feels like it is the modern jazz in a lot of ways. So, and that's the thing that Talk Talk did for me. They really, because I discovered them when I was 21 for the first time, and they actually did change my life because that's when I was going through kind of one of my first big transitional phases of my whole life, and I think this is the band that kind of just brought the ultimate comfort for me, and just knowing that God's always got my back to nature, because they certainly have a lot of like Christian themes of Christianity to them. I think I really like to identify with a lot of those and just sort of kind of find my close relationship, with God, and whenever I listen to Talk Talk. Um, but yeah, to get with their albums, you got the self-titled album Talk Talk in the year 1982, and again, it's the only reason it's just like the first two few albums of the Beatles. It's like the exact same feeling. It's like the '80s version of going through the Beatles, but they were way less popular. But they deserve to be as popular as the Beatles. They still are wildly underrated, honestly. But yeah, they're just like kind of a generic synth pop band on this album because they're just not very serious, in a lot of ways. But it's not really a strange transformation. I will say, listening to it, you can kind of tell that there's something. I think a lot of artists in the early '80s who were going for synth pop certainly had like a serious side to them, and I think a lot of them were too intimidated to be serious. Like they wanted to be perceived as a fun party person, without getting wild with synthesizers. Just kind of being more about hop than about ambience. And I think they acquired ambience gradually through this 5 album process of the band. And I think that's the thing. It feels like Depeche Mode was doing it better, honestly, though. Depeche Mode had this down better. Talk Talk was meant for something else. It's kind of what it comes down to. But then the album It's My Life in 1984, that's when it really started to kind of start coming together, not into masterpiece territory, but the band is definitely evolving into something that's different. I mean, Mark Hollis is a genius of a vocalist, perhaps up there with Tom York is my favorite of all time. I mean, yeah, golly, it's really different. And it's just because it's so smooth and confident. Like it feels like it's a voice that almost borderline shouldn't work, but he doesn't border it ever. And it just ends up feeling perfect in a way that just sounds like just an overwhelmingly tuned with nature. I think the band encourages humanity to be more in tune with nature. And the Beatles had this message to it too, and a lot of other things. But Talk Talk was kind of more straight to the point, I think, of what that kind of a lot of what that feeling of the Beatles does evoke, which is that healthy relationship with nature in a lot of ways. This is just but it's still like the self-titled track. It's my life. I mean, certainly a wonderful song of confidence. But honestly, the magic all starts with The Color of Spring in 1986. Now they got the last 3 albums, and I think they're all 3 like just absolute 5-star masterpieces because it's like The Color of Spring isn't even fully a post-rock sound, but it's just different than anything else I've heard. Like it's more pop. It's almost pop they've ever been with this evolved sound, but it's kind of just evolving the sound of It's My Life to something on a further canvas. And now they're like really putting focus and attention to the album. It's one of the most amazing albums I've ever heard. Like Happiness Is Easy instantly just kicks in. And I don't know, instantly the word life affirming comes to mind when I hear them. Much in the way of watching some of the best like Terrence Malick films or Andrei Tarkovsky. The joyful sides of a lot of this. So this is a very joyful side. And shade a lot of ways that's being expressed in this album. And also some irony perhaps as well of like, why can't it always be this nice, like I don't believe in you. I mean, geez, that's such a beautiful song. Life is what you make. It's transcendent. Well, they have a positive message to it. Talk Talk always kind of has a positive outlook on them. Kind of looking at, perhaps having faced death and then just that moment of mad rush of a must live, Yeah, and it's just yeah, there's nothing you can miss here. I mean, Living in Another World is transcendent with its bass line, April 5th. These songs just have such a like that song just has such a groove to it. Living in Another World, I mean, that really does take me to another place. And April 5th is just, man, it's just really a transcendent kind of almost depression that's kind of coming out, but hope and depression. That's what I often like to feel when I feel depressed. I just feel hope, as well as just with songs like Time It's Time, the perfect conclusion of the album. I mean, it's so perfect that it kind of hurts how beautiful this song is. Like, it's just so optimistic and so cheerful. It does make you want to cheer. I feel like I'm watching the mirror and I get that kind of final rush and just like, wow, I must do something now. I'm so motivated right now. But perhaps they were still had a slight revolutionary instinct to them. I think that's what happens to a lot of bands when they're younger. And then when they get older, you ditch that and kind of give it to just God more. And that's what they're kind of doing literally here. And like songs like Chameleon Day, and Give It Up. It's all just transcendent in the end. It's a transcendent kind of sound, definitely distinctively 80s in its production, but I think it holds up timelessly as a perfect sound of just feeling connected to nature. As the best 80s was really tapped onto, like R.E.M., Kate Bush. It's just a lot of it just seemed like just developing something of a relationship with nature, the timelessness of that. That's the thing. You're just the band. This album doesn't really feature like the loud kind of synth. It's very subtle synth layers and a little more like just electronic. I don't know. This is just what they just start reminding me of. Like, honestly, all of this reminds me of like later radio, like in Radiohead and Rainbows Onward, but with like different type of production, almost more minimal. They're even more minimal, I would say, in a sense. But it literally does feel like it's foreshadowing a lot of this. And you got Steve Winwood on some of the guitar stuff, which, I mean, yeah, he would play like Jimi Hendrix and had some pretty interesting solo work. So, yeah, this is just originally atmospheric. And there is something ascending truly about, as one of the songs later is called, Ascension, Laughing Stock. But there is something ascending about listening to Talk Talk. It really does feel like an expression that heaven on earth is a real thing, and anybody is capable of finding this for themselves. And this is a band that's one of the best at all time at pointing a finger towards this, in a lot of ways. Just again, like, it's this feeling of growing and evolving as a person, and finding the beauty of that with your relationship with nature, and how every individual is capable of this, completely ego-free. And it feels like a summation of like a lot of the best jazz, like Radiohead's doing, just like all the best jazz here, and like has that optimistic message of connection with nature that the Beatles has. But it's just, wow, it's its own language entirely. There's nothing like it. Kate Bush reminds me a lot of later Kate Bush stuff too. Just this kind of jazzy influence going into it. I don't know. It's just really original. That's all I can say. It really does feel like a perfect foreshadow to a lot of the sound of the 90s. And Talk Talk would fully establish this sound with the album Spirit of Eden, which they made in 1988, which is literally just as peaceful as an album gets. Like, it's literally just feels like an album was just possessed by nature. It just had to express every single thing it felt about its relationship. And it certainly is an album that makes me just really desire a connection with nature in the first place. And to know that is to never want to lose that in a certain kind of way, through all the light and dark. This is like a light side of a coin. The Laughing Stock's like a slightly darker side. I don't know, this album just really does sound like a sunshine is hovering over. Like, songs like The Rainbow, it just is like a transcendent sound that just like, wow, this just tops any Pink Floyd for me. Is like my favorite sound of just peace, because this is like almost like an evolved version of progressive rock. It's like post rock has an answer to progressive rock, and it's almost like it's about less is more, and I think it's evolving all that, taking in some of that, like, Led Zeppelin influence, making it better. Like, it's just jazz, some folk here, even a lot of Christian, mysticism is living in this album. And that's what Talk introduced me to, the mysticism of Christianity. And that's the spark I always needed to fall in love with Christianity 100% for myself. And, Talk is perhaps the best band I've ever heard at pointing a finger towards that notion specifically, and kind of just having that for yourself and finding it for yourself, like songs like I Believe in You. That's actually finding hope after his brother dies from a heroin overdose. I mean, that's just really subtle, and it's just really heavy and beautiful. So there's just so much nature that's captured here. And I mean, it's just the spirituality here is just overwhelming. The songs like Desire, I mean, the opening organ, it's just like the end with the rainbow. It is transcendent, and then it just builds into probably the heaviest song on this album. It's kind of rock and roll. Inheritance too. It's just, songs are so beautiful. Eden is so soft and sweet, and the compositions here just feel so perfect. Wealth is like, probably the most patient part of the album, but all the same, it is just quite an amazing conclusion to this perfect album. Very spiritual, but less intense about it than John Coltrane. They kind of had a band take on the John Coltrane formula, which is, I mean, they were even like in a jazz, like recording studio, I believe. I'm not sure if it was for this one or not, because a lot of this behind the scenes was extremely mysterious. Because apparently there's rumors it was just getting really crazy, especially on the album Laughing Stock. I mean, it was just so crazy they can never do this again. And that's a lot of my fear. I'm anxiety. I built music. It's like there is a bug of I'm capable of doing this, but obviously I'm nowhere near as good as this. But all the same, I'm going to keep going at it. Just keep it small rather than go for anything revolutionary. As Talk kind of does communicate that message, I think, of they're going to have that instinct when you're young, when you're perceiving a lot of this as a revolutionary instinct. I'm guilty of this. And then I think with age, and I think through this particular process I'm honing in on, it's not meant to be revolutionary. It's meant to be a glorification of something greater, a greater force, something completely greater than yourself. And that's kind of what the feeling, the complete spark I get when I listen to this album. And Talk and just kind of cataloging as a whole, I do feel this kind of spark that just tells me to just live in a very organic way that did lead me to like a lot of jazz, like John Coltrane, and I kind of acquired jazz by way of listening to this band, and a lot of the other post rock stuff, a lot of electronica too. And Radiohead, most importantly. I mean, they really were like, Radiohead took some time for me to love. Now they're like literally. I mean, geez, with REM was the best band of all time, really. I mean, right now it feels like I prefer Radiohead, but then REM always comes around. It's a certain kind of like, it's almost the most important, to me, but Radiohead is just equally perfect. Laughing Stock, anyway, Talk is right there too. Laughing Stock in 1991 is the best album they did. This is like a flip side of Spirit of Eden. Sounds like they were just feeling moody, and it feels like a cloudy atmosphere is kind of reigning over, almost like a judgment day is happening throughout the progression of this album. And it's powerfully earthy. And yeah, I heard this when I was 21, and it changed my life. It made me want to just always be in nature, slow down, and really smell the roses. This is when it all started for me. I think a lot of ways this album, and it's very inspiring. Inspiring, honestly. Like After the Flood, his perfect new grass. It literally can bring tears out of you because it's so like heavenly. It feels like we don't deserve. It almost just feels like I don't deserve something this good. That's the way it feels when I listen to Talk. It's just one of the most organic albums ever made, and it just feels like it's a world that I'd never get tired of. Like I just feel all these strong emotions while I'm feeling quite relaxed at all the same time. It's not too overwhelming. Another album this kind of reminds me of, which came out also in 1991, is Loveless, but it feels like, it's just evolved Spirit of Eden to even cooler places, more interesting. This is almost like Spirit of Eden playing kind of the straightforward notes, and then Laughing Stock kind of plays all the offbeat, off-kilter notes. There's a lot like the contrast of Wish You Were Here to Animals by Pink Floyd. I think Talk was on a similar kind of plane here, like Spirit of Eden is kind of like this more straightforward melancholy, joy. That's what they are. They like melancholic joy. And Laughing Stock is kind of like a darker, but the chord progressions are perhaps like transcended even further, squared almost. I'm such a huge fan of this album. Though. Spirit of Eden is just as perfect, but I think just the layers this takes you through. I mean, like Miraham is just so perfect. And Ascension Day, it's just got to be like the loudest part. I love I can't stop listening to the progressions there, where it's just soft. I mean, it's literally just defines alternative rock. It's just soft, loud, soft, and it just explodes until it just cuts you off all of a sudden right to After the Flood, which is just a segue into one of the most beautiful songs ever made. It's 10 minutes long, and it's just the entire way through something completely transcendent is happening here. It's absolutely a perfect experience, just like Taphead, which is very haunting. I've listened to this with people who, I feel like they're like have literally been horrified by this album, and I usually don't often seem afraid of stuff, but this album does it. It's actually terrifying. It evokes some emotions that are quite unforgettable, just like Newgrass. I don't even know how to describe those emotions because they're just quite like heaven on earth. Renai is just unforgettable. But, that's just the thing. Laughing Stock is everything about this album. And I know I'm contradictive myself because I'm talking too much about a band. I feel like they're telling me to shut up by the title. The ironic Talk, but all the same, it's fun to get it out anyways. Just talk. Just say, if you haven't heard of this band, I highly recommend this band to everybody. Like I said, if you have a slight interest in, like just the evolutionary aspects of the Beatles, the revolutionary qualities, but maybe just kind of realizing, okay, I don't need to be that revolutionary. Just appreciate that people already came around and did that. It's like, I'm meant to be more simple than that, it's, ground those kind of high expectations to something more honed in and relaxed. As Talk. They weren't that popular, but they kept doing it, getting better and better, It's like, well, as, the popularity of like a lot of the acts that came before them. But yeah, Talk's original. I do recommend them to every single person on the planet, literally. They're one of the most important bands ever. They're one of the best bands ever, too. It's only 3 members, but yeah, Mark Hollis is such a genius. Can't get enough of that. His solo work's also up there too, and it opens up a new language of music to me, which is just hearing and tuning into nature and reality, and finding the simplicity of that and the connection with others within that nature. It's just reading the books that kind of hone in on this art, in a lot of ways, and just putting words to what you're feeling. That's what the context of words are meant to do through text that you read. Why am I talking about books? I know I'm on the band talk, but all the same, I'm just saying, enough artists are pointing me to this foundation. Yeah, it's going to be where it's going to be new. I'm not going to talk about it for a long time because I'm so new to books, but I'm going to keep on my lane all the same. But start preceding books, that's where you can evolve. I just say all this because Talk is probably the biggest band that opened me up to the foundation of my relationship with nature in a lot of ways. And they're really important, man. They really are something special, original, fascinating, and just awe-inspiring. So many different ways that you just got to listen to it. My words can't, again, as always, just can't do the justice of how good this sounds. So I just recommend them to all.